Thanks very much for joining us for episode 24 of InTek Freight and Logistics, the podcast. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my co-host for this edition, InTek CEO Rick Lagore. On this episode, it's the holiday season, which also means it's go time for retailers as they look to draw consumers looking for gifts. Let's get started. The holiday season is a key point on the retail calendar. After all, the term Black Friday comes from the idea that the heavy shopping activity puts retailers in the black. But consumer and retail behavior has evolved, so what's in store for this holiday season, and how does it affect freight? Joining us to discuss is Jon Gold, Vice President of Supply Chain and Customs Policy with the National Retail Federation. Jon, thanks very much for joining us.
Kevin, thanks for having me.
So tell us about the National Retail Federation and what you do with the organization.
Sure. So the National Retail Federation, we're the world's largest retail trade association. We represent everybody from the small single store operators up to the large format big box stores, online chain restaurants, and everybody in between. We're a full service trade association. So we do everything from government affairs to networking to conferences. Obviously, we have our annual big show in New York in January, which is our big premier event. But we do a lot of work with the retail industry throughout the year. And my role here is on the government affairs side of the house, where I handle all of our supply chain and trade and product safety related issues. So from a legislative and regulatory perspective, working on all the different issues before Congress, the administration, tied to the supply chain.
Great. We're recording this in the first part of November, but we really are already in the midst of holiday shopping season, and the NRF recently put out some projections. So what is the general outlook for retail this holiday season?
Sure. I think the outlook is good. As you noted, we just put out our holiday projections, our sales forecast earlier this week, which anticipates that holiday spending is going to reach record levels during November and December and grow between 3 and 4% over 2022 to between $957 billion and $966 billion. We expect consumers to spend on average $875 on gifts, decorations, food, and other key seasonal items. This amount is $42 more than consumers planned to spend last year in 2022, which was an all-time high. And it's in line with the average holiday budget that we've seen over the last 5 years. So, despite some of the economic headwinds that we continue to see, I think we're looking at a really good holiday season once again.
As you mentioned, the amount that people are going to spend is going to be more this year, or projected to be more this year. Get any sense of if that is driven because just prices have gone up, or is that because of they're actually purchasing more goods?
I think it's a little bit of both. Obviously, we have seen some prices increase. We've also seen prices come down. I think it really just depends on the product, but I think consumers are certainly ready to spend on the holidays as they've had, and they're prioritizing that holiday spending.
Yeah, we're not really at the peak of what we were seeing inflation-wise. I mean, really, actually, I think we're a little bit lower than we were at this point last holiday season. So that's positive. But the growth projections, and it's noted in the release, which people can find on your website, they're a little bit less dramatic. We had a couple of big jumps, especially after the pandemic started to dissipate. But how encouraging is it that, we do still, you mentioned economic headwinds, but we're still seeing some growth in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I think despite the slower growth rate compared over the past couple of years during COVID, when we had trillions of dollars pumped into the economy through stimulus, this year's holiday spending is consistent with what we've seen over the past 10 years. We saw average holiday increases from 2010 to 2019 around 3.6%. So this year's numbers are kind of in line with that, kind of back to where we were pre-pandemic levels. But I think more importantly, the winter holidays are an important tradition for American families. And shoppers are, again, prioritizing the holiday purchases for the people most important to them. So that's why you're seeing those numbers up again as, shoppers are getting ready to spend on families and friends.
So we already talked a little bit about inflation. What are some of the other obstacles that we are seeing that are keeping it from being maybe even more robust than it's looking like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, there's still a lot of uncertainty going on with the economy, whether it's inflation, which, as you noted, is coming down a little bit, but we still have higher gas prices. Those are coming down a little bit. Credit conditions, elevated interest rates, those are all challenges for American consumers, and as well as weather. When you have a warm Christmas season, you don't have folks out buying sweaters and jackets and everything for cold weather. So that can be a challenge as well.
And also noted is the sort of spending pattern that we've really been seeing for better part of a year and a half, where again, maybe partially related to the pandemic, people shifted a little bit from buying as much in the way of goods, but going more towards services. Is that something you're still seeing as well?
Yeah, I mean, look, we saw a significant shift to online shopping early on in the pandemic when, as we all know, many brick and mortar stores were forced to shut down because they were deemed as non essential. And many of those retailers had to find ways to stay in business. So they certainly ramped up their e-commerce and online presence. While that surged early on in the pandemic, it certainly leveled off once the economy opened back up. But for this holiday season, we're certainly going to see online and other non-store sales continue to increase between 7 and 9% for a total of between $273 billion and $278 billion. That figure's up significantly from the $255 billion we saw last year. And as we continue to check in with consumers and do our surveys, shopping destination trends continue to be 58% consumers plan to shop online, followed by department stores, discount stores, and grocery stores. But online certainly seems to be one of the key destinations for consumers.
Yeah, certainly online shopping has been, it was already growing plenty over the years, but
that's right.
When people were left with not too many choices to go out, that became really an even bigger deal.
The question I have is, you're talking about big round numbers. Is there a segment of the retail market that is growing further? Are people looking at buying more clothing? Is it more electronics? What direction is the spending going?
I think it's all the above. We'll have more specifics on the specific categories in a few weeks once we get more information from the consumers. But I think it's all your traditional holiday merchandise that everybody's looking at. Again, apparel, electronics, books, jewelry, healthcare. All those products are certainly seeing rises in e-commerce sites.
As we just mentioned a little bit, the balance really for consumer spending that we've seen over the last couple of years definitely shifted. You mentioned all of the e-commerce that was really big during the pandemic when people really weren't leaving the house. But when they started to be able to get out and about again, a lot of people started spending on experiences, vacations, things like that. Are we still seeing that balance tilt that direction a little bit?
Yeah, I think, as you noted, during the pandemic, we saw about $1 trillion swing in consumer spending from services to goods. Again, as people were pretty much forced to stay home and couldn't go out and travel and eat out and everything else. But that spending has shifted back as consumers are back spending on travel, entertainment, experiences, sporting events, and everything else. The spending continues, but consumers are also spending on goods and products. That still remains a priority. It will certainly impact some holiday spending to a degree, as we expect consumers to spend on both goods and experiences as holiday gifts. But it's important to note that, again, consumers are going to continue to prioritize holiday spending. So that's why we see our average number up from where it was last year.
On the freight side of things, the freight industry has been dealing with a general lack of volume of goods to ship for several months now. And one of the reasons was right around that time that dramatic shift happened when people started to go back to the services. Some retailers were left with excess inventory, something that they're starting to, I think, get a handle on a little bit more. But where does that stand now? And are you still seeing some retailers maybe having a little bit of hesitancy so that they don't get potentially burned again with maybe having too much?
Yeah, I think, what we saw during the pandemic was certainly something I don't think anybody's ever seen, with the significant shift in consumer spending and retailers trying to make up for that and over ordering on products. But I think, you need to realize you're only going to, buy new TVs every so often, new furniture and things like that. But I think many retailers now have their inventories back in line with where they were pre-pandemic levels. I think they've been able to level off and get the right balance. Forecasting has always been a difficult job, and when you're trying to do that during a pandemic, it's even that much more difficult. But I think for the most part, retailers are back in line with where they are on inventories. The demand and surge is definitely cooled, and again, back in line with where we saw during the pandemic. And I think that's recognizing kind of what we're seeing in some of the import levels that we're seeing as well, where you don't have the same surge in import container volumes that we saw over the past couple of years. Again, back in line with kind of where we were pre-pandemic.
So normally that we see on the freight side a surge at some point, pre-pandemic even, it would normally occur, sometime around mid-August and last, let's call it maybe a week after Thanksgiving into the first part of December. Really haven't seen it this year. Everyone's been getting their inventory in line. Do you have a sense that next year we'll see a more typical pattern?
We certainly hope so. Obviously it's unclear what next year's economy is going to look like and where we're going to be. But I think in general, many retailers have made shifts in their supply chain So they're not bringing everything in at one point in time. They're kind of extending out their peak shipping season, whereas you noted typically would be, that August to kind of November run, where now they're bringing product in, starting in June and July. And obviously we did that this year for a variety of different reasons. There were some, labor challenges that we're trying to get around, labor negotiations in the ports and rail and truck. So trying to get around those issues. But I think retailers have learned a lot of lessons throughout the pandemic that, again, spread it out a little bit more so you have that consistent flow of goods, not just everything coming in at one point in time. But, we certainly hope that we're back to quote unquote normal going into next year. But it's, unclear at this point in time. But I think, many retailers are trying to get ahead and plan appropriately and, again, make sure they're in line with where their customers are.
So another question I have is in line with that. You mentioned some of the things that the retailers are doing in terms of bringing the product in a different pattern that they have done previously. Have you noticed any changes in just their overall supply chain? You work on the government side based off of regulations along customs and nearshoring and just movement of their supply chains from, say, one country to another country to take advantage of either labor or just overall better economic ties between governments? So basically what I'm trying to get down to is what are some other things that you've seen out there that retailers have done to change their supply chain and what they've learned over the years?
Sure. I mean, we've definitely seen a move towards a diversification within the supply chain. And that started, even pre-pandemic with the Section 301 tariffs on China and the trade war as companies look to shift their supply chains and implement a, China plus one strategy where they're looking elsewhere. And that only got heightened during the pandemic because of all the challenges we saw with sourcing out of China. So companies, retailers certainly are looking around the globe, whether that's friendshoring, nearshoring, onshoring. They're looking at all different opportunities to figure out what makes the most sense for their supply chains, their products. But shifting your supply chain is not easy and takes time. There are a lot of different challenges that you face with trying to find new vendors. Unfortunately, nobody has the capacity that China does. So trying to make up for that is difficult. Making sure you've got the right workforce, you've got the infrastructure in place to handle the shift in volumes, making sure you're able to do all your different technical testing, government required testing on different products. That all takes time. It can take months or it can take years, really depending upon the product. So I think retailers are continuing to take a look at that. And obviously with the current state of, world affairs, whether it's the geopolitical situation with China or the ongoing wars we have currently that are ongoing with Russia and Ukraine and now in the Middle East, retailers are paying very close attention to that and trying to make sure they're planning appropriately to mitigate any issues that can happen within their supply chain.
So did those last few years, leading into and through the pandemic, really, do you get a sense that retailers really did move towards a more agile stance, basically, to try and mitigate? We had a lot of shortage issues, partially due to the heightened demand, but as you said, there are a lot of other factors at play. So do you have the sense in the organization now that retailers really are trying to be a little bit more nimble to be able to adjust to, whatever comes their way?
Yeah, I think so, because I think as we've learned, there's always some kind of disruption that happens within the supply chain. Obviously what we're going through the pandemic was something nobody had ever been through. But, within the pandemic, we had other issues that were impacting and disrupting the supply chain. We had, the vessel stuck in the Suez Canal. We had a vessel stuck outside of Baltimore. We had other weather-related issues that impacted supply chain. So I think retailers really are now taking this to heart and really kind of looking to make sure they have risk mitigation strategies baked in to make sure that when these issues do arise, they've got the ability to shift and pivot and avoid any kind of disruption in their supply chain. And the important part is making sure that they have the right vendors and suppliers and providers in place that can work with them to ensure that they can implement whatever strategy they have to avoid those disruptions.
And so you mentioned nearshoring. We've had a couple of podcasts lately where we've been talking with folks based out of Mexico or working on solutions relating to moving freight between the U.S. and Mexico. And of course, nearshoring definitely involves Mexico, and a lot of companies are still sort of in the process of getting things up and running there. What's your sense of where that stands in terms of, you mentioned a potential multi-year process?
Yeah, I think Mexico certainly is on the plate for where retailers are looking to shift sourcing. Obviously, Mexico is one of our largest trading partners. Having the updated U.S., Canada, Mexico agreement, the replacement to NAFTA certainly is important. proximity is everything. So being able to just move product across the borders as opposed to across oceans certainly is a important part in cutting down on some of those logistics costs. I think, again, as retailers are evaluating Mexico and other countries, again, do they fit into the mix of what the retailer is looking for and the product they're trying to shift and source? Again, skill set, capacity, all those issues are incredibly important. So there might be certain categories where it makes sense to go to Mexico, and other categories look to go elsewhere, whether it's somewhere else in Asia or Latin America or even Africa. So I think Mexico certainly is on the list that people are continuing to look at.
So you talked about, when we were talking about freight behavior sort of spreading out a little bit more in terms of not necessarily being a peak season, but just shipping throughout the year to be supplied for the holidays. And so something we also see, it seems like the Black Friday tradition of, this is the day that all the sales are has shifted as well, where
Right.
We're really already seeing, even before Halloween in October, I think, the start of holiday shopping season. How is that looking, and how do those two things sort of intertwine?
Yeah, I mean, I think consumers are looking for those sales earlier and earlier. So I think that's why retailers are responding with that. But we still see Black Friday, Small Business Saturday, and Cyber Monday as big shopping events that consumers still enjoy. I mean, we certainly see many retailers who are shifting their hours on Black Friday now to allow employees to be home with families throughout that event. So it's shifting based upon what the consumers are looking for. We look at the entirety of the kind of winter holiday as a selling season. But as you know, you've got these specific events that that consumers still enjoy. They enjoy being out and going and doing shopping, whether it's in store or online. So retailers again are reacting to what their customers are looking for. So that's why you're seeing some of the earlier sales and spread out sales throughout the season.
Yeah, the Black Friday thing is sort of the experiential shift that, again, people were kind of shut out of it for a year or two there, but it is back to something that people can go out and do.
Absolutely, and I think consumers love that experience. So you're going to continue to see Black Friday as a holiday event for some families.
So any particular tips the NRF has for people going about their shopping this year, whether it be online, in-person, combination?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best tip is probably for shoppers to start shopping early. I think, retailers will have plenty of product available, but obviously the deals will be coming, throughout the holiday season. We know that consumers already started browsing and shopping for those deals. Similar to what we've seen in previous years, about 43% of holiday shoppers say they generally start their holiday shopping before November, as we've talked about a little bit here. And the top reasons why we're seeing that is to get ahead, spread out their budget, avoid the stress of last minute shopping, and avoid the crowds. So again, that's why retailers are offering those deals earlier in the season to meet what the consumer is looking for. But again, we always have to say shop early, shop often. So I think we'll have consumers will certainly be looking to do that.
Yeah, I think best laid plans, right, where you think you're going to get it all done, but there's always going to be a few things right right at the end there.
Exactly. There's always those last few items you need when you realize, oh, I forgot this person, or you see that commercial. It's like, oh, my child wants that now. So it's always the last minute things you've got to get.
I would think part of the trending towards a little bit earlier as well might relate to the shortages that people have dealt with in recent years as well. Partially supply chain issues, things like that, where there were certain products that were a little hard to get. So if you see it, you want to get it, right?
Exactly. That's absolutely right. I think we're beyond those shortages issues. I think that was specific to what we saw during the pandemic and all the challenges and supply chain issues that we witnessed. But again, I think retailers have gotten through that and bringing product in earlier in the season, putting it up earlier in the season. So I think consumers should feel comfortable that they won't see any kind of shortage this season. But again, if you see it and you want it, go ahead and grab it.
So the NRF does these projections, and then of course it's not that long after where you typically have the hard numbers to release as well, right?
Yeah, we'll have those. Obviously, we'll have after the kind of Black Friday, Cyber Monday, we'll put out some numbers, and then after the end of the holiday season, we'll put out some numbers towards the end of the year, or I think early January, we'll put out the results from the holiday season.
So where can people go to find out more about the organization and to get a sense of the projections right now and follow those numbers as the season goes along?
The best place to go is our website, www.nrf.com. You'll see lots of the holiday information right there on the front page. But we also have it all under our media releases as well as under our holiday data and trends. And we do, as you guys know, all the different holidays that we look at, whether it's, back to school, Super Bowl, 4th of July, Halloween. We look at all the different consumer holidays, and spending's been up in all those holidays, which has been really good for the industry.
Great. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, again, I think we're looking for a holiday, another holiday season, and looking forward to maybe catching up with you guys again as a recap to see how things went.
Sounds good. Jon, thanks very much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Great. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us for InTek Freight and Logistics, the podcast. And thanks very much to Jon Gold for taking the time to speak with us. Check out the links in the description to learn more about everything we discussed. Subscribe or follow now to ensure you get our latest episodes as soon as they're available, and you can help us out by rating and reviewing us wherever you listen. If you have questions, email us at podcast@intechlogistics.com and visit intechfreight-logistics.com for more about what we do. For Rick Lagore, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll talk to you next time.